It is Wednesday, the 29th of November. A lot going on in our world, and to talk more about that for a weekly segment on global affairs, Elliot Tepper, Carleton University political science professor. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Mark.
It's been a while. I've had a chance to listen to you and Mark talk about the developments in this world, and last week was very busy, of course, a lot of topics to cover. A big story for us today, and over the last 24 hours, it has been big for the last few months now and a few years, but it just seems we're getting closer and closer to something. What that is, I don't know, but an emergency session of the UN Security Council has been called for later today in New York to discuss the nuclear tensions heating up after North Korea's longest-range missile test yesterday.
There's always so much to talk about, but in a way, starting with this one, we can say this is the only real big story, and all the rest are just detail. Why? This is about nuclear Armageddon. This is the possibility that our world will enter into a new nuclear age, not only in terms of competition, but of actual war. And there is no bigger ticket item in world affairs. I'm very concerned about what's going on in North Korea. I've been on this show a while talking about it. I bring it up as often as possible as a reminder that we now have reached the technical capacity to wipe ourselves off the face of the earth as a species. I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but that's the way it is. And what we have now is another test, and this time a very ominous one, and it leaves us with the same basic dilemma that we've had all along, what to do about North Korea. North Korea clearly is bent on achieving a nuclear strike capacity by air. They also are talking about having land-based and sea-based capacity for defensive purposes. They say it's defense. All their neighbors wonder about, if the U.S. actually pulled out and made a deal of some kind, that would leave them defenseless against a neighbor that has nuclear weapons. So there's a very grave concern here. Now, let's talk about this particular one. Yes, General Mattis, Defense Secretary Mattis, has now said, coming from him, it's important, North Korea can now hit any place on Earth. They're still obviously short of the capacity to put a miniaturized nuclear warhead onto that and deliver it accurately to where they want it to go. But nevertheless, what we've seen today is a major step, because anything that can go 1,000 kilometers up, straight up more or less, can also then on a more horizontal trajectory hit pretty well anywhere on the globe, certainly anywhere in America. America meaning Canada as well as the U.S.
I mean, that's amazing to hear that. I mean, they were talking about Washington even being in striking distance, depending on the payload of what would be on that
and all that.
But even in that region, just how dangerous it is right now. And I know Japan and South Korea, and hearing what China is saying now, condemning it, but still not really doing anything else.
Well, China, as well as Russia, have joined the international consensus at the UN Security Council level to pass sanctions and to say a lot of things. The question always comes back, will the strategy work, which is, I think, a sound strategy of trying to convince China to change its calculus of its own national interests so they see North Korea as a liability and not as an asset. And actually, so far, there is no real sign of that, although clearly there's no love lost between the current leadership of China and North Korea. And also, Russia seems to not want another nuclear state. Really, remember, they're also in that same neighborhood. They go all the way to that area and, in fact, have a small border with North Korea. So right now, the world is faced with another crisis. Canada, interestingly, is becoming more of a player. The same story we read this morning says that Canada now says yes, but we also are under threat. Before it was no, except by accident if their aim is bad. So we're not really, but now we clearly see this as a threat. And Canada is co-hosting an international meeting of foreign ministers, co-hosting with America. Japan apparently is going to be here. We don't have a lot of details, but it is important for us to take this seriously.
I think as Canadians, too. I mean, David Wright, a physicist, arms control expert with the Union of Concerned Scientists, he talked about this, about a missile from Pyongyang fired would have a range about 13,000 kilometers if flown on a standard trajectory. And such a missile would have more than enough range to reach Washington, D.C. He also acknowledged, however, the nuclear payload on such a missile would shorten the potential range, and that could land anywhere between here and there.
And how accurate are they? And suppose one flies over Canada on the way to to the U.S. and what's our obligations? What's our concern if, well, maybe it'll just fall short? So this is a very serious issue. On the other hand, it's not our job to scare the Canadian public, and we're not yet back at the situation. The main concerns remain this. First of all, basically an accidental war. What about the gamesmanship that's going on? There's a big game of chicken going on. Mm-hmm. I can push this far and not farther. Both America and North Korea plays this game. What if they guess wrong? In a game of chicken, somebody has to blink, and that could go wrong. An accidental war. This is a possibility where somebody just pulls a trigger the wrong way or pushes a button the wrong way. Something's misunderstood. That's a flock of geese. No, it's a missile. We better launch our missiles. This kind of thing. So the possibility of a spark in this tinderbox remains. But, of course, now looming beyond that is a concern about what America will do. Fortunately, the American president has just been in both Japan and in South Korea. He wanted to go to the DMZ. I think he has a more realistic feel for what the possible damage could be, but there's an unpredictability factor in the American response, which is causing almost as much concern in Asia as the North Korea threat itself.
He's been when it comes to this subject, yes. I noticed. He'll go off. He has made comments in the past, of course, on Twitter and off-the-cuff remarks, or maybe they're statements, I don't know anymore, about North Korea. But, looking at who surrounds Donald Trump right. in that office, military men who have been around for a long time and know the lay of the land, how much influence do they have, and do they really have the power in that decision?
Well, there's always the question of, right now we're counting on General Mattis, McMaster, Kelly, to be a restraining factor. But they're generals. Generals, is it a case of when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail? So we're counting on generals who, in this case of General Mattis, has a reputation of action-oriented. He wants to go. But he's the one who said, no, this would be catastrophic. Rex Tillerson is a factor here, apparently. Let's use the term that's been in the air over North Korea, strategic patience. The Trump administration came in saying the era of strategic patience is over, meaning the Obama policy of not giving in to that cycle which has been there all along. North Korea creates a crisis, then they allow themselves to be bought off. We'll give you all kinds of things if you stop. They say, oh, sure, we'll go along, and then they create a new crisis. And the Obama administration said, we're not buying into that game anymore. Strategic patience. We're going to find ways to put pressure on you and wait you out. And then strategic patience then was abandoned as a policy officially by the Trump administration. Rex Tillerson seems to be following a personal strategic patience game. He's put up with a lot from the American president. The president will say, oh, well, this is what it is, and he'll go out the next day and say, well, not really. So we have that in the case of North Korea as well. He's the one who keeps saying, as a Secretary of State, diplomacy is the only possible option. His strategic patience in terms of constraining Trump, we don't know how that strategy is actually working out. Relying on generals and others to restrain a president already tells you something about the danger that we are in.
Elliot Tepper, Carleton University political science professor, joins us for our Global Affairs Weekly segment. A crucial December for the GOP and America coming up. We'll talk about that next. And welcome back to our weekly Global Affairs segment with Elliot Tepper, Carleton University political science professor. It's a big month on the horizon here, just a few days, December, big month for the GOP and for America.
Indeed it is. One of the fascinating things about America right now is it's fascinating. It's riveting. We have to, again, have kind of a big picture here. It's just as we did with, nukes are the biggest item on our global agenda, no matter what else is happening. In terms of America, what's happening there in the big picture, it seems to me, is America is being fundamentally changed in ways which often get lost in the daily dramas. What a change. We went from no drama Obama into drama every minute. So the United States is riveting and fascinating in terms of its day-to-day, minute-by-minute activities coming out of the Twitter account of the American president and some of his other actions. But it's the same thing we've been saying for a long time here on air. Don't only watch the circus, and I watch the circus. I'm a news junkie. But watch the sausage factory. That is, watch where policy is being made. And it's very important. So let's talk first about some of the
Democrats have
things.
one talking
I call
point
this
on
the
taxes.
daily chum. That is, the American president tosses out every day, sometimes several times in a day, bait for the press. And the sharks gather, and we all chew it around. Everybody chews it around. So every day there's something. And now we could spend the whole rest of the time talking about today's daily chum. After all, conspiracy theories are being promulgated from the White House. I think that's worth noting. What he did with the code, I don't know if people have followed this, but American Navajo Indians were crucial in the last war because they did a lot of the code talking. They would get on air, and nobody could ever break the code because it wasn't a code, it was their own language. Mm-hmm. And they were now being honored in the White House. And what happened? He honors them in front of a photo of Andrew Jackson, who signed some of the worst legislation against the Navajos in particular, but also Indians, natives across the country. And he did it in front of, nobody's picked this up, of the famous Remington statue of the last roundup, the broken Indian. So then he talks about Pocahontas, because he couldn't resist saying, "Oh, well, they're Indians. I've got something about Indians. Oh, yes, it's Elizabeth Warren, and I call her Pocahontas." No clue at all, and now he's catching some flack for that. But this stuff is daily. It goes on. This is the daily chum, and we, of course, pay attention to it. You have to. You can't ignore it. The conspiracy theories that are retweeted and coming out, he's back on the birtherism apparently, and so all of that is fascinating. But we have to keep in mind that underneath that, America is being profoundly changed by what I've been calling the Republican ascendancy. So while we're watching the circus, the Mueller investigation is going on. We don't know where that will lead, but there's also two others. The FBI is independently doing things. Will the American government be brought down by investigations? We don't know. So everything that we see in this daily circus is, in effect, a diversion away from will the American president end up having to be removed from office one way or another? But beyond that, America is being changed in very crucial ways. The tax bill, which is now, I think, coming up successfully for a vote. It looks to me as if this tax, it's not just a tax set of measures. Mm-hmm. They are fundamentally changing the structure of how Americans are taxed. It's being rushed through with no real hearings, hardly any markup. And it looks like it'll pass because the Republicans are so desperate for anything that will feed their corporate sponsors, their base, the broad Republican base. This is a Republican tax plan, not a Trump tax plan. They want it. And it looks like they're putting enough goodies in to get the holdouts, so they might get this passed. This will change America, how Americans are taxed. And now the figures are coming out, and it's precisely what you would expect. It's going to be good to the rich and not so good for everybody else. But it's okay with the Republican strategy. Trickle down. I mean, we know a lot about trickle down theory. It doesn't trickle. There's an impermeable barrier between the super rich and everybody else. You give them the money, they don't invest it. They put it in the banks and buy each other out and put it overseas and dubious things. So a lot is going to happen in terms of the tax code, but that's only one. The judiciary is being changed. The Republicans very successfully blocked the Obama administration from filling not just a Supreme Court position, which Gorsuch has now filled and which they talk about all the time, but there's another 136 or so that the Republicans would not let Obama fill. Those are being filled by young conservatives, and they're being rushed through with hardly any vetting. In fact, 4 of them were declared non-eligible and by the Bar Association, and they're going to go through anyway. So that's being changed. Immigration. A lot is happening on immigration. The security forces, in effect, broadly defined, are really chasing immigrants. Whatever the courts say on the immigration ban, that feeds the base. Things on the environment. Regulatory measures all across the way are being changed so that the environment is being affected. The restraint on the banking system, more financial system, which brought us the Great Recession of 2008, and then corrective measures, the corrective measures are being removed. So I have no idea what is happening in housing and urban development under Dr. Carson. What's he doing there? What's Betsy DeVos doing in education? America is being fundamentally changed. So watch that to the degree one can, as well as, the fascinating circus.
Well, Trump had also been scheduled to meet with Democratic
Yes.
leaders. It was Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer yesterday. They didn't show because Trump had tweeted out, meeting with Chuck and Nancy today about keeping government open and working. Problem is they want illegal immigrants flooding into our country unchecked. Are weak on crime, want to substantially raise taxes,
Yes.
capitalize. I don't see a deal, he tweeted. And they didn't show up. And, I mean, it looks like he's been unleashed lately. And I don't know if it's too early to tell if there's a pattern there. Getting back to your point of other big things happening and kind of deliberately just turning us away and watching the news, they jump on it.
So what we're talking about are two empty chairs at a meeting. What was the meeting about? The American government can close down December 8th if there's no measure put in place to raise the debt ceiling. That requires bipartisan support, and it's apparently not being sought. The government of the United States of America could close down on the 8th of December, just days from now, and that's one thing to watch for. And then Trump has already said, hey, it's all right with me, I'll just blame the Democrats. Well, the last time this happened, the Republicans caught the blame. So the Republican leadership has vowed they'll never let it happen again. Trump's quite content to let it happen. So there's a big drama there. On the 12th of December, there's an election in Alabama, and Donald Trump has insinuated himself there. This is the Judge Roy Moore. This is to replace Jeff Sessions, who's now the Attorney General. There was a rumor in Washington that the guy to replace Jeff Sessions would be Jeff Sessions, that the Republican establishment would launch a write-in campaign to put himself there. But at the moment, it looks like there is going to be a very tight race in Alabama. Who will win? Can a Democrat actually win in the state of Alabama under these very special circumstances? But beyond that, that would really affect the balance of power in the U.S. Senate, because then the Republicans would be down to only one vote margin, and they've got all these tax bills coming and a number of other measures in December. And beyond that, there's NAFTA, which is looming. And how is all this going to play out between the president and Congress and everything else that's going on?
And there's quite a bit going on. And, I mean, the House tax plan could crush grad students. I know that was a big one today. So there's all those little issues. The other
Yes.
people you don't hear about who are being affected by this.
Yes, and, the whole business where you have to lower the corporate tax rate because the corporations are not competitive abroad because other countries have, but they don't pay the taxes. There's so many loopholes which have been lobbied for successfully. People forget this. There's loopholes and they're legal. Well, yes, they're legal. They were made legal because of successful lobbying by the very forces which now want to also get through this form of the tax bill. So American politics is in for a rough ride in the near-term future.
And before I let you go, and just kind of tying it all back with North Korea and where the situation is right now, if you look at what is happening by the leader of North Korea,
yes.
He is pushing Trump in a direction where he's closer to making that agonizing choice. He
Right.
has a choice to make here, so
Yes.
which is interesting for the future.
One of the questions being raised, and you hinted at it just a moment ago, what's going on here? It does seem to some people that the President of the United States is getting even more erratic rather than this just being a continuation of a pattern. One of the big questions right now is, and can you imagine we're asking this question, Mark, is the American president stable enough to deal with a nuclear crisis with North Korea?
Elliot Tepper, Carleton University political science professor. Always great to meet. We'll do it again next week, a little bit longer, and talk about a few more things happening. 'Cause there's
Always
lots.
more.